Alrighty, everyone. Art Burns here on the Showing Up to Your Life podcast on YouTube, which needs a proper introduction, and that will be forthcoming soon, I hope. But welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad to have you join me today. Or I don't know that you're listening to this or watching this today necessarily, but glad to be sharing some thoughts with you. Let's leave it at that. Well, I wanted to spend a little time today talking about um, some of the sort of impacts and the specifically the way that mindfulness helps us to create to make better decisions, really. To be not better. When I say better, that has this sort of connotation of value, and that's not what we're talking about in terms of like good or bad kind of thing, right? It's still a non-judging thing, but there are decisions that we make that can be either more or less beneficial to us, right? And so I want to talk about that a little bit today, because tomorrow, tomorrow I'm going to make the big announcement about this self-compassion course, and I have to tell you, folks, I am so excited about this. Now, I have done a lot of courses in the past, and I always feel very excited about them, but this one, I'm just so pumped, and I'm so pumped about it, and I'm offering it. I'm going against all the advice of all my marketing coaches and all that stuff. I've found that the more I go against their advice, the more successful I seem to be. Maybe not financially successful, but I feel more success, right? I feel more sort of fulfillment, and I feel more, connection and more sort of results on a sort of holistic level. Let's put it that way. Okay, so I'm offering this at a very inexpensive price, so that I can get a lot of people in here, because the thing is that self-compassion it really is so important for all. I mean, there's just so many ways in which self-compassion is. It's like one of my clients recently told me it's like a superpower, and I totally agree with that. Now, and it can be applied. It's like it applies to every aspect, every facet of our lives, right? So in the next like 7 days or so, or 6 days, leading up to the self-compassion practice, you better believe that I'm gonna have plenty to say, plenty of podcasts that we're gonna do, and YouTube videos based on the concepts and the benefits and everything to do with self-compassion. So for today, let's talk about some good old-fashioned mindfulness. Before I do that, though, real quick, so I got, some of you may or may not have noticed, but I changed the lighting here a little bit. Actually, I just turned it a little, because you could see that, like, yeah, there's a lot of like different sort of lighting issues that come up with these umbrella lights that I have. They're not really pro grade or anything. They were like $30 on Amazon like 2 years ago, maybe actually like 3.5, 4 years ago now. And it's amazing that they're still standing and still working. But here's the thing. I changed recently how I set them up so it's a little less bright. And it was mostly just a comfort thing for myself, because I found that, having these lights just kind of drill into my eyeballs really became very uncomfortable. And not just doing these videos, but this is also my setup when I do my calls with clients. I'm in the same exact spot. So I spend a lot of time every day with these lights just bearing down on me. And I just realized, well, hold on a second. I can just turn the umbrellas around and it softens it up so much. And so somebody commented or emailed me. I don't remember if it was a YouTube comment or sent me an email. Thank you, by the way, whoever you are. Not whoever you are. I know who you are. You know who you are, but I'm not going to, call you out in front of all 300 people who are watching this video right now. But I want to tell you all that if there's anything that I'm doing here that you feel could be make you more comfortable, because the email that I got was the person said, thank you for changing the lighting. It really helps for those of us who have issues with glare, and it never even occurred to me, right? And that's kind of part of what mindfulness is all about, and that's kind of what I mean by the decision making, right? So I want you to be free to speak up on that, right? Like we're friends here, right? Like there's no judgment from me, there's no hassle from me. Like if somebody says, "Hey, I wish the lights were, more red," I'll try to figure that out. I mean, to the extent that I'm able to do it without spending a ton of money and going through a lot of time that I don't have. Money and time are pretty scarce in my life these days. But as long as it's not too expensive on either of those levels, I am happy to accommodate whatever I can do to make you all enjoy these videos and podcasts more. Okay, so please let me know if there's anything that's like, if you don't like the way the guitar looks over there, I'll move the guitar. I mean, even my grandfather's painting. I mean, I can't imagine anybody's going to be offended by any of that stuff. But let me know what it would require to make this a more comfortable experience for you. Okay. Because I do the best I can to make it comfortable for me, so why shouldn't it be comfortable for you too? So, and speaking of which, I have some kind of little sinus congestion going today. I think it's mostly because my daughter insisted we turn on the air conditioner last night because she was a little warm in her room, but she refuses to open her window because of noise outside. And so I think I just got a little tickle in my throat and a little stuffy nose here. So pardon me, and I might look tired, and that's just because I didn't sleep that much last night. But trust me, everything is okay. All right, so let's talk about again, some kind of basics on mindfulness, right? Because now here's the thing, right? Everybody comes to this work for a reason, right? Now that reason could be purely just to be more in touch with your spirituality, and in that case, that's what a lot of people are drawn towards Buddhism and even Taoism, I guess, to a certain degree. Certainly Zen Buddhism is a very popular kind of thing for that. People seeking some spiritual understanding and some spiritual connection to others, right? That is often the reason why people come into mindfulness, especially when we talk about, obviously, the spiritual level of mindfulness, which would be, the Buddhism or the even Taoism, again, to a lesser degree, but Zen Buddhism versus, Buddhism, all that, But the thing is that for this sort of more scientific end of mindfulness, and this does not exclude the Buddhist end of it, right, or the spirituality end of it, but I think for the more especially as it applies to the more scientific end, like what I kind of talk about here, and what people like John Kabat-Zinn talk about, right? Who's the mindfulness-based stress reduction doctor, Dr. Kristen Neff, and her partner Michael Germer, I think I got his name right that time, where they talk about self-compassion. These things are all within the context of and within sort of under the umbrella of mindfulness, right? But they're more sort of science-y kind of approaches, right? Medical science based on research, based on all that, right? And so, sorry, I just got distracted for a second. So when we talk about the more scientific end of mindfulness, right? And self-compassion and compassion and all the different things that I talk about here, right? I think most people come to this work, right, on, again, not so much the spiritual end, but more like the sciencey psychology kind of end. Most people come to this work because there's something that's, I hesitate to use the word wrong, but there's something bothering them about their moment-to-moment existence, right? Now, my friend and colleague in my other podcast, the Learning to Surf podcast, Adam Asdell, he came to this work from, and of course we talk about this on the podcast, so I'm not outing him in any way. I would never do that, obviously. But he came to this work, and the reason I bring him up is because maybe some of you have heard those podcasts, but he came to this work because of high levels of anxiety that he was experiencing, right? For me, I came to this work because of just general stress, right? That little did I know at the time it came from PTSD, actually CPTSD, right? Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Which of course includes a lot of anxiety, depression, emotional reactivity, dysregulation, all that kind of stuff, right? That was really bothering me in my life, right? The ability to, to be okay and not to be emotionally reactive and dysregulated, was causing me issues in my life, right? And that's the thing, right? It was preventing me from living the life that I believed that I wanted to, or was entitled to, or even was supposed to be living, right? Like I envision myself as, for instance, a caring and patient and compassionate parent, right? But I was not able to be those things because of the stress that was happening in my body, right? And which led to the dysregulation and the anxiety and the depression and all that stuff, right? And sure, to be sure, right? Sometimes mindfulness alone is not necessarily enough, right? Like I've been in various forms of therapy. My thing is not so much a traditional therapist, but more like sort of trauma informed programs, if you will, right? That's just the way it's worked out for me. It's not that I value one or the other or refuse to do one or the other, just the way it's worked out, right? But again, it's, yes, my mindfulness practice would probably get me to that same place, but going through therapy sometimes is a very helpful, sort of aspect, or sort of a supplement to the practice, or maybe this practice is a supplement to the therapy. And that is something that I have found extraordinarily powerful, right? Is that anybody who I've ever worked with as a client, the ones, or let me rephrase that. Those people I've worked with as a teacher or coach, who are also in therapy, well, those people get the most out of this. There's no question about that. Like those are the people that I see changing like a caterpillar into a butterfly. Like those, I mean, that is some deep changes. And that's the thing, right? Like this work, what it does is it sets us up to heal, and it sets us up to understand what needs to be healed, right? And so the healing itself, now that can be done on your own, certainly, and I've done a lot of that on my own for sure, right? But again, sometimes, especially when dealing with like childhood trauma and stuff, sometimes a professional helper, in the form of a psychologist or counselor or coach or what have you, is oftentimes a very, very helpful thing to, again, sort of an adjunct sort of benefit, right? Or adjunct process that can really be helpful and beneficial. And so that's all to say that really ultimately what we're trying to do is when we're not trying to do, but when we practice mindfulness, what arises, right? And this is not just me saying this. This is, many of these books are talking about the same thing, right? That the idea of mindfulness practices, right, allow us to be present on such a level with our emotions, with the tendencies of our mind, right? Like, in other words, seeing like, okay, how did I just wind up thinking about that bike mechanic that treated me badly 3 years ago? Why did that just pop into my mind, right? Instead of just flowing with it and be like, oh, I hate that guy, right? You can question like, wait, why am I thinking about this guy? And then you think, oh, I got on my bike, I heard that noise, and that was the noise that the guy couldn't fix. There it is, right? It has nothing to do with that guy, right? Like he's not in my life, and I don't need to pay him any kind of homage of any sort. Right? Like I can if I feel compassion towards him, that's my choice, right? But I don't need to let him, kind of like they say, live in my head rent free, right? Like I don't need to do that. I can instead let that go, but I can only let it go when I see it. Right? If I'm wrapped up in it and that thought is just, part of my identification and getting caught up in the entanglement and that sort of flow of that thought, well then I can't ask that question. I can't create that separation. I just literally can't do it. It's like physics. Like you just physically can't do it at that point. So instead, it's about seeing the things that we're going through, seeing our emotions, seeing our thoughts, seeing our behaviors as sort of with a sort of third party or third person detachment, if you will. That's the best way that I can describe it. And it's just so powerful. Like I remember when I broke my collarbone a couple of years ago out here in Denver, and like normally I was the kind of person who, I mean, I was the worst patient. Like I remember once in the hospital after being stabbed and beaten, right? Like I refused to sign the paperwork because I was such a demanding patient. Like that's the level at which it was. But here I was at the Denver Health Hospital here with a broken collarbone, and I was the most patient they've ever seen. Like even like the lady forgot to bring me my, she offered me like a ibuprofen or something. She forgot to bring it to me, and I wasn't even upset. Like it was, and the reason for that is because I was watching myself go through it almost as though I was watching someone else go through this experience. And that is really powerful. And so the way to get to that place is again to see the activity of our mind, our emotions, our physical sensations, and our thoughts, to see that with that sort of detachment, right? And there's a great practice that I want to share with you that you can use to do this, okay? It's not really meditation. It's just a very simple mindfulness practice. So take 5 minutes or 15 minutes if you like. Take an hour if you're really into it, right? But take whatever period of time, set a timer, and for that period of time, while that timer is ticking down, sort of narrate what you're going through but like noting it, right? So in other words, and I do this myself, all the practices that I ever share with you, I've done, either in the past, or I always try to refresh it for a week or two before I share it with you. And so I've been doing this one, and it's kind of like, like, oh, I'm noticing my lip balm on my desk. I'm unscrewing the lip balm or popping the cap off. I'm twisting it. I'm watching it. I'm putting it on my lips now. I'm feeling good. I'm putting the cap back on. I'm placing the lip balm back on my desk. Now I'm paying attention again to my podcast and YouTube channel. I'm noticing that the microphone seems a little bit off center, so I'm going to try to move that a little bit. I'm noticing the candle in the screen. I'm noticing the plant. I'm noticing the painting. I can't do this. I'm noticing the painting. I'm noticing the guitar. I'm smiling. I'm feeling happy, right? Do that. Again, even for just a few minutes at a time, it's going to help to cultivate that detachment. And from there, you get into a little bit of meditation, and you're on your way to all of the benefits that I talk about here, right? And of course, if you like some help, I can help you. All right, everybody. So that's it for this segment. I'm going to turn it off real quick and start the next one. I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. Here we are, segment number 2 today. And so what I want to talk about in this segment is kind of a follow-up from the last segment, right? In the last segment, I talked about how, that sort of third-person detachment that we can get, right, in our moment-to-moment experience, right? It's about seeing us go through our lives from a little bit of a distance, right? And this, of course, opens us up to all kinds of concepts, later on, once you get comfortable with this, sort of feeling of doing this, you're going to ultimately, start to see that, that there's, when you're operating kind of from your ego self versus your authentic self. Right. And because that's really the separation that we're talking about. Right. Like our ego is, it's dependent on, praise and approval. And, depending on, of course, this is a widely ranging kind of thing. Right. No two people are alike. Right. But egos can require, outside validation and praise and all this kind of stuff, or else we start feeling, maybe we start getting a little depressed and things like this, right? And so, of course, this is a big, long conversation. That's not what this segment is about. We can talk about this in another time, right? But that's one of the things that starts to happen as we get this detachment that I was talking about in the last segment, right? We start to notice when, and for me, it's been more about the trauma response and trauma strategy, right? Rather than the authentic place, right? So in other words, I recognize when I'm operating from my trauma, right? Which means that I'm operating from this place of, again, reactivity and really a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of, but again, there's a strategy that's been formed based on all of that I've gone through, and that's my go-to when I get into those places of my trauma being triggered, right? And so that's the kind of thing that we start to see. Like, I start to see, like, oh, what I'm thinking right now, what I'm doing right now, the way I just talked to that person, the way I just did that thing, it's coming from my trauma. It's not coming from who I really am. Right. And so this sort of separation between our behavior and our essence is something that starts to unfold for us as we start to do this practice, like the practice I mentioned in the last segment. And that's, again, just a very simple version of mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is about just noticing what is going on and paying attention to it, with intention and with a kindness and an acceptance that is soft and again, kind and ultimately compassionate. And so as we cultivate this, as we work and we cultivate this sort of understanding, one of the things that arises, and there's lots of things that arise from this, right? And one of them is emotional intelligence, right? That's not the one that I'm talking about just yet, but emotional intelligence, right? The ability to sort of understand our own emotions and the emotions of someone else, and using that information to guide our decision making. Remember, I mentioned that in the last segment, right? It's all about making decisions that benefit us, right? And so I can decide that, either you or me is in this emotional state that it's not the right time for a conversation right now. So I'm going to decide to go take a walk around the block before I try to enter into this conversation with you. Or if I can even do so, I'll schedule it for tomorrow, right? Hoping that we both get a lot of nice rest tonight and we can come back fresh and sort of clean and discuss this thing, right? Emotional unintelligence is not considering any of that, right? Just barreling into it and just dealing with those consequences. And there are often consequences, right? And so that in and of itself is a huge, huge benefit to us, right? To our moment-to-moment experience, right? It can change so many things, right? And again, those consequences, those are the things, right? Like, when we experience, again, if I don't exercise emotional intelligence, I just barrel into that conversation, even though you or I are not in the place that we're going to have a constructive conversation. Well, then whatever comes out of that conversation poses those consequences. And I can't escape those, right? But then those consequences will usually create more consequences. And that's where life starts to feel like it's just a series of kind of vaguely connected drama, periods of drama in our lives. And we look at it and say, oh my gosh, what a mess, right? And again, that really all does come down to emotional intelligence, or let's put it this way: emotional intelligence could cut out, 75% of that mess, right? It doesn't make your life necessarily perfect, but it enables you to react and relate to your life in a much different way. And so one of the things that comes through that sort of, it's certainly connected to that emotional intelligence, but also just arises from mindfulness in general, right? It is another extraordinarily important skill, right? And this is true for, everything from young children to aging elders, right? And that is critical thinking. Now, I have a friend. He's really the husband of a close friend of mine who is a school teacher. And at one point, like a few years ago, I was in a conversation with him, and my kids are homeschooled, right? Because I don't want to get too much into the political views about school, but there's some issues that I have with the way schools kind of warehouse kids and the way, testing is done and sort of, the focus of the education system, I think is not as, anyway, I don't want to get into the politics of it, okay? Because, I mean, you might send your kids to school and you might be very happy with that. My experience with school is different. Let's just leave it at that, okay? But one of the things that my friend said was that school teaches critical thinking. And I almost like spit out whatever I was drinking. I was like, what? I was like, I think that's the last thing that school does. Right? I think school is about teaching kids that you got to accept this information because we're going to test you on it. And if you fail the test, you're a failure, right? And I think that's the furthest thing from critical thinking, right? I think critical thinking comes from the ability to know that you know what, there's many different ways in which things could unfold. There's many different ways in which someone could interpret something. There's many different ways in which the truth could exist, right? Or to even better than that, critical thinking allows us to understand that there is no single truth, right? That the truth is your truth or my truth. And that's where they say that most stories have three sides to them, right? There's your side of the story, there's my side of the story, and in between there is some kind of objective truth, right? Like what actually happened, right? Because the thing is that the way that you perceive it is based on what's going on inside of you and how you're relating to that whole thing. And the way I perceive it is based on my own thing like that. And so therefore, if you are, let's say one of us is depressed and the other person is feeling very happy, we're going to have completely different views of this truth that we're talking about, right? And yes, there is an agreed upon reality out there, right? Like we both saw a red car drive by, right? But we might have seen, like, you might have seen a candy apple red where I saw a cherry red, right? Like, and you might have certain associations with that red car. Like, maybe for you, you got into an accident in a red car when you were a child and you get this feeling of fear from seeing that red car. Whereas me, red car was like my first time with a girl. And so I have this beautiful memory about this, right? So it's like, that again, the car doesn't change, right? The car is just the car. It's my truth about that car differs from your truth about that car. So understanding that and again, in sort of embodying that understanding, that's what leads us to the ability of critical thinking, right? It leads us to say, okay, I believe this thing about this thing, but what if I'm wrong? What if I get more information about this thing that changes my view on it? That is critical thinking. And that is something that arises very naturally through the mindfulness practices, especially the one I just gave you in the last segment. So go check that out. All right, everyone. I'm going to cut it short a little bit, just by a minute, I think. Actually, no, I think we're over 30 minutes between the two segments. I have my question and answer call with Dr. Dan Siegel in about, I don't know, like 30 minutes or something like that. 33 minutes, and I am just so excited. So I'll bid you adieu for now, and I wish you well, and I'll be back again tomorrow to make this big announcement and to start serving up a really beautiful, mushy, daily dose of self-compassion, and it's going to be wonderful, and I'm so excited. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I wish you well. Be back soon. Take care.